All right, so let's pick up from last week. So last week we talked about how do we apply these 4 principles of efficient grading to the front end of assignments: assigning and grading valuable work, grading based on achievement using rubrics, classroom time, using classroom time because it's so valuable, and keeping in mind that the best feedback is personalized and verbal. So we looked at the front end of assignments, and I asked you to go forth and to begin applying those principles to the front end of assessment and assignments. Some of you might have gone ahead and started looking at the back half, but that's what we're going to talk about today. How do we apply these principles to the back end of assessments? So we saw those 6 steps in the sequence of assessments, and here we're going to see the last 3. So the first one was choosing work, the next one was choosing grading criteria, and the next one was actually administering the assignment. Now we're going to look at the back half, collecting and assessing the assignment, which is typically begins on the due date, providing feedback, and then allowing structured use of feedback. And this last one is often sort of neglected, so we're going to try to take a few minutes to talk about what does that look like. So, but you notice because the principles are the same, right? These are the same 4 principles. It should be kind of easy to apply these to the back half of assignment and doing assignments and assessment, because we kind of have some familiarity with the front half already. So, in terms of collecting and assessing the assignment, these you could break them into 2 separate steps. I decided to put them into the same step to collect and assess. Because we need to make sure that we're only giving valuable work for our kids to do, we should ask the question, should this work even receive a grade? What fraction? Maybe a portion of it is graded and the other portion isn't. Sometimes you can do sort of hybrid, parts with that. Is all of it graded, some of it, only a little? So when you're collecting it, you should be aware of your decision whether or not you're going to give it a grade or not, and your kids should be aware of that. And what is the value in that grade? Because we want to make sure that we're grading based on achievement, when you actually are in the process of collecting and assessing the assignment, to what extent will the learners evaluate their own work? On the day that you collect it, are they going to work, have any peer discussion? Are they going to reflect on the work that they've done, depending on the extent of it? Was it a big project or just kind of a quick thing? How are learners going to interact with their own work now that they've brought it? Remember, classroom time is valuable, and I mentioned in the last screencast how important discussion is. How will the finished work be used in class? One really valuable technique that I have been sort of perfecting over the last couple of years is having students take an article home to read, answer a few questions, and then we come to class and we discuss it. And the buy-in is incredible. It's amazing that, 98% of students will read that writing, answer the questions, and come in because they know that we're going to have a discussion and they're going to be held accountable for what they know in that discussion. So that's the valuable learning is what's going on in the classroom, in that case at least. But you always have to ask, is there valuable learning that can happen afterward? Like when the students bring that assignment, what are you going to use it for in the class? Don't just have them walk in and hand it into the turn-in tray or give it to you. Students will buy in if you use the work that they do. I never assign work unless we're going to actually use it in the classroom, because classroom time is so, so valuable. When you take the assignment, can you give them any feedback right now? Before you even, actually take it and give a grade, if you give a grade, is there a way that you can give feedback upon a cursory glance? Or maybe, depending on your modality of feedback, are their classmates going to give feedback? Can you give feedback right now? Even before you have really carefully looked it over. That's something I always try to do as well. Give some kind of feedback right now. That will also increase buy-in. Speaking of feedback, if you run over here and just look at this whole category of this whole step of providing feedback. If the work is valuable, how valuable is the feedback? It ought to be pretty valuable. And it ought to be valuable not just to you, but to the learner. It should be, your feedback that you're giving them should kind of help you to clarify your thoughts about what have they done. And your feedback needs to help your learner grow, or at the very least understand, sort of offer a sort of explanation for this is the reason for the grade that you got. Although just, again, that caveat, if you attach a grade to feedback, the feedback is less effective. Because we want to make sure that we're grading based on achievement, We want to make sure that our feedback addresses or responds to achievement rather than a bunch of distractors. Oh, your work is very neat. Oh, your work is very pretty. Oh, it looks like you worked really hard on this. Okay, that's feedback, but it's certainly not giving feedback on achievement. It's giving feedback on what I would call distractors, things that really don't address achievement at all. And so we talked in an earlier screencast about what do we mean when we say achievement. Is this measurable, and are we addressing our learning goals? For classroom time that's most valuable, when you're giving feedback, is your feedback going to be public? Is it going to be private? Is the feedback accessed by students in your presence? Can they read over your feedback while you're in front of them? We'll get a little bit more into this over here, allowing structured use of feedback. But how can they look at or address your feedback in class? And then because the best feedback is personalized and verbal, again, we're coming back to the same question. What was your chosen modality of feedback? Was it just a grade? Because that would be bad. Is it, a grade with feedback? Is it feedback all by itself? Is it verbal? Is it written? Is it peer-to-peer? What kind of feedback is it? It's important to make sure that students understand why you've chosen this modality of feedback, and what good is this to them. And this last and very overlooked category in the sequence of grading, most of us skip this one entirely. Even I do on occasion, but we really want to try not to skip this because students need to interact with your feedback. If your feedback is valuable, then students should be able to interact. Does the assignment provide a valuable opportunity for feedback in the first place? If it's not, honestly, don't give feedback. It's okay to give an assignment if there's very little feedback. But if the work is valuable, then hopefully it provides valuable opportunity for some kind of feedback in one way or another. Does it? If you're going to give feedback that addresses achievement, can the student reflect on their achievement and then respond to your feedback? This is important, is being able to respond. You are not, Thor Almighty, of the gods, and you just hand down, grades and feedback. The student should be able to interact with your feedback and ask, okay, does this feedback really address how much I've achieved? Because classroom time is so valuable, to what extent can the learner consider the feedback and respond during class time while you're there? That's important. There should be a public sort of airing of response to feedback, or at least offer the opportunity. Even if students don't really make use of that opportunity, that is one way that you can really encourage an open and sort of democratic kind of environment in your classroom, in which students don't see feedback as threatening. It's really a tool that they can use in order to say, hey, Mr. Teacher, you told me this on my, essay. Can we talk about this? Again, the best feedback is personalized and verbal. And so to what extent can students discuss your feedback, either with you or with other students? And then, again, by what modality? One of the coolest ones is when you give students feedback on something they've done and they respond to you in writing. That is so powerful. It's amazing how much you can get into a student's brain by really getting a sense for how are they responding to your feedback. This is an incredibly powerful tool, and it's a really great reflection piece that a student can use, not just to say, well, how did I do? But here, I'm going to, I, the student, am going to respond to your feedback, and tell you kind of how I feel about that. Do I agree with this? I don't agree with that. And it's more than just an evaluation of the assignment. It's a dialogue. It's an engagement. It's sort of a back and forth in which student and instructor can sort of grow in that feedback. So we don't want to forget that we also have to use our 4 important principles of efficiency, grading efficiency, on the back end of assignments and assessment as well, not just at the beginning. So with all that in mind, let's kind of do some brainstorming. Last week, you might have tried to apply some of the 4 principles to your practice. That's great, but let's start looking to the future now that we have begun to expand and think about a little bit more about how to apply these principles to assessment and assignments. You have a brainstorming worksheet in front of you that looks like this. And what I'm going to ask you to do is to identify some specific practices you can do, or even avoid if you can think of some things, oh, I shouldn't do this anymore, in order to increase your grading and assessment efficiency without reducing effectiveness. That's important. We can't just spend a lot less time if it's going to be a lot less effective. So we have to make sure that, the time that we spend is well spent and we're not spending too much time. So try to come up with a concept from each of the 4 principles. You can see that there's, for each one of the portions of our grading sequence, we start in 1, 2, so it's kind of going clockwise. There's 4 arrows. So I'm hoping that you can maybe on your own think of, in terms of your practice, in terms of what you are doing in the classroom, what are some ways that you can apply those 4 principles when you are choosing work? What are ways you can apply them with grading criteria, choosing grading criteria, administering assessments, collecting assessments, and doing the assessing, providing feedback and structured use of feedback? How can you apply these in your practice? Try to make this a valuable tool for you that you can even refer to, in your, daily practice. That if you're about to assign something, or if you are in the process of assessing it or giving feedback, take a look at this, sort of idea web. So this should be valuable to you. So you can look back at some other materials that you've gotten, but try to make this almost kind of a study tool for you as far as your grading efficiency goes. And of course, as promised, here is my works cited section. I really used a few more pieces of work than is represented here, but these are the ones that are actually included in my presentation.